So we had an election. I mentioned to you on Monday this week, we had an election. We had many local elections in the great state of Texas this past Saturday, and some of them got national attention, really big national attention. And one area where this occurred was in a beautiful community called South Lake, not too far from where we are right now. And this was an election that actually ended up involving several people who were to serve on the school board there, several people, city council races. And the reason it got national attention was because there has been a very large and public focus on the issues of whether or not critical race theory agenda should become a part of the public schools. There was a massive initiative by a left-wing organization to try to bring this critical race theory and a leftist social justice mindset into this school district. By the way, one of the most highly ranked school districts in Texas. And there were parents who finally decided to organize and speak up and fight back against this, what was felt by many as just an attempt to really undermine the unity and the health and the camaraderie and the connection among the people in this area of South Lake and the Carroll ISD. So joining us, we have her online. Just a moment, she'll be joining us. She ran for the Carroll ISD Board of Trustees, Place 5. This is my new friend, Hannah Smith. She's an attorney. We actually have several mutual friends. That's how I was so grateful I could connect with her. But she's an attorney by background. She's a mother of, I think it's 4 kids. And she has kids in the school, and she ran for and won this position on the Carroll ISD Board of Trustees, Place 5. And among the many issues that were front and center in this campaign had to do with addressing critical race theory. So without further introduction, I'd like to introduce you to our new friend, Hannah Smith.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're available today. I'm just thrilled you're available today. And I know you've been getting a lot of media attention since not normally a national media thing to run for school board, but sure was in your case. So if you would just start with, why did you decide to run for school board?
I'm the mom of 4 dragons. Our logo here in South Lake is the dragon, and all of the schools have the same logo. So I have 4 kids that are in 4 different schools here in South Lake Carroll ISD. And, I've been involved with their schools, volunteering as a PTA member, and I've even been on some of the boards for the Carroll ISD school board, some of the committees like budget and finance and student health. So I've been really involved in the school district. But the end of summer, last fall, a lot of us became very concerned about some things that were happening in our school district, and we banded together and we started investigating, and some of the things we found really deeply troubled us. And so it was because of that and because of my passion to maintain the excellence of our school district that I decided to run, and I won.
Yes, you did win. And actually, I meant to say when I was introducing this topic, I don't have the names and positions of all the people, but there were essentially 5 positions in which it was school board, city council, and maybe even a mayor's race. And the point was, all the people who ran on the platform essentially, we have to stand up and reject this critical race theory agenda in our public schools, won handily, like 70-30. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was 1 mayor's race, 2 city council races, and 2 school board seats. So you said it correctly.
Okay, so I want to just dive into this. What is the reason that you found the critical race theory agenda that was being proposed for your schools? Why did you find it bothersome?
Well, last August, our school board was presented with a plan that was called the Cultural Competence Action Plan. And it was a 34-page document that outlined all of the different ways the school district wanted to change our curriculum, our teacher training, our teacher review for job performance evaluations, our student clubs, our communications. I mean, it was a comprehensive plan. It was just not about curriculum, but it was about everything about our district. And the real focus of it was to use equity as a lens for everything that we do in our school district. And surprisingly, that word equity was not defined anywhere in the plan, but we could see what would happen with this plan because it's happened all around the country. So for example, the plan wanted to track and punish microaggressions, which are defined in the plan to be intentional or unintentional offenses that are in the eye of the beholder, so they're completely subjective. The victim gets to decide when they're offended. They would track those and they would punish them. And that, to me, as an attorney, was of serious concern, because I think it's really a First Amendment issue. It blatantly infringes upon free speech. It chills free speech. Nobody knows when they're going to be punished for a microaggression, and so they just stop talking. And that, to me, was just horrifying, right? Because especially on the issue of race, where we want our kids to be talking about these really sensitive issues, our kids won't talk about them anymore because microaggression tracking would just essentially cut off all conversation. And let me just be really clear about something right from the start. I am not tolerant of any form of discrimination, racial discrimination, ethnic discrimination. I don't want our kids to be harassed. I don't want our kids to be discriminated against, and I don't want them to be bullied. But I do think that we need to go about it in a different way. And that was really what was wrong with the CCAP. It's just that it went about it in a way using critical race theory and equity as a lens to completely change our district. And that was what was really concerning to me.
I am really glad you add that point. I was going to go into, there were, of course, in every, I mean, even years ago when I was in high school, there were always things said that were potentially harmful or insensitive. And I like that schools have become more active in speaking up and encouraging children to speak up, young people to speak up and say, that's not okay to talk that way, or that, this seems offensive to me. To encourage conversation and understanding each other should be part of what, in the broader scope, Western civilization, freedom of speech, but even teaching children how to function in the real world requires communication. So the microaggression thing you're describing would have had exactly the opposite effect. It would cause kids to think, I better not say anything because I might say something that constitutes a microaggression. So, and actually what you're describing, there was no way under this proposed system for the student who is accused to say, actually, I didn't mean that, I didn't mean that to be offensive. Is that correct?
Well, that's the very definition of a microaggression. It doesn't matter if it's intentional or unintentional. What it matters is the impact or the effect on the alleged victim. And so that's what's so troublesome. And there were also some due process concerns as well, because they set up an anonymous reporting system where you could anonymously report this stuff. And so normally under our system of due process in American jurisprudence, you're afforded the right to confront your accuser. You're afforded the right to see the evidence presented against you. You're afforded the right to be able to respond. And there are certain rights under federal law that are due to students when they're accused of things like this. And so it was really problematic from a due process perspective, just that they were essentially adopting a guilty until proven innocent kind of a system.
Yeah, I've talked about due process in this show very often. I'm a lawyer by background also, and it is just integral to the whole idea of a just justice system, that you're told what the charges are, the accusation, you can confront the people who are accusing you, you can bring in your own answers. And it's shocking this even what got as far as it did. You also mentioned that they stressed the word equity, and I know you know this, but I'd love to have you just say, what's so bad about equity versus equality?
So our American system of law, our culture is based on equality. It's based on equality of opportunity. It's based on this notion of color blindness. I clerked at the Supreme Court, and every day when I walked into that Supreme Court building, I walked under a statue of Lady Justice, and she's blindfolded. And that symbolism is that there is equal justice under the law for all. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. It doesn't matter your background or socioeconomic status. And that's what America is built on, is equality. But equity, they're really trying to change the way equity is viewed. Equity should be very similar to equality. It's derived from the same root. It should be a similar definition, but progressive liberals have changed the definition of equity to mean that we don't just look at equality of opportunity, we look at the results. What are the results that we are seeing? And if the results aren't equal, then we have a problem. And so equity really talks about how do we achieve the end result that we want, where everybody comes out in the same place, not whether everybody had the same opportunity. And that's really problematic because, especially in our district, we had a statement in the CCAP itself that specifically said there are no statistically significant differences in student achievement on test scores based on race or ethnicity. So what does that mean? That means that there are no educational inequalities in our district based on race or ethnicity. So we have no educational inequalities based on race that need to be solved by a system of equity. So that was really the problem that I saw with this from the very beginning, is that this was a solution in search of a problem. We didn't have educational inequalities in our city or in our schools, and we didn't need to solve them. You know, we live in a very affluent city. People come here from all over the country because it's such a great place to raise their families. And regardless of your skin color, you get a wonderful education at South Lake Carroll, and we don't need to revamp it in the lens of equity.
I love that answer. I do want to talk about, I know that there was an incident, there have been instances, and probably all over the country, but an incident that had got some attention nationally that involved some students behaving poorly who were part of your school system there. And I'm getting at the point, no one's trying to claim the school is perfect, that there are never students who act out of line, there are never students who say things that are insensitive and truly offensive things. But the question really is, this reaction, and I understand that part of what gave rise to this CCAP was that one incident that seemed to get a lot of national attention. So the question really to you is, so people who are aware of that incident, they want to hear from you, the new school board, and people generally at the school. What is the student supposed to do when they do feel like, if we're not going to go on to this big system that was being proposed, what are they supposed to do when they feel they've been mistreated or spoken to in a racially insensitive manner or the subject of discrimination? How does the school handle that?
So that's a great question, and I have been very clear throughout my campaign that we don't tolerate discrimination, we don't tolerate harassment, we don't tolerate racism. We have a student code of conduct in our district that is over 100 and some pages long. It's really huge, and it has sections in it that deal with freedom from discrimination and harassment and bullying and racism and all of these different provisions that set out the framework for what teachers and administrators need to do when they're confronted with these kinds of situations by their students or by fellow teachers. And so my argument has been from the very beginning is that we have really not consistently applied our student code of conduct. And so this was really an overreaction to that, not fulfilling our duties and applying the student code of conduct. And so we overreacted by saying, well, we need to adopt this new 34-page plan to set everything straight. And my point is simply that, no, we don't need a new plan. We just need a really strong backed administration to really implement and enforce the student code of conduct.
Yeah, related to that, I would say the notion of having students be aware. If you're a student, a minority student at one of your schools, and you feel like either the conduct or words of teacher, fellow students was in some way racist, do the kids know what they're supposed to do? Because that seems like the most obvious answer is make sure kids know we're not saying, too bad, sorry you got offended, and there's nothing to be done about it. We're saying we have an avenue, and here's what it is. So that is a duty, I'm assuming you would agree, on the part of the school to make sure kids all know how to proceed if they do have an issue.
Yes, and that's what I've actually recommended now that I'm on the school board is I want to have extensive trainings for our teachers, our administrators, our parents, and our students so that they understand what is in the student code of conduct and what the expectations are, because we need to hold them to those expectations.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I have to say, I'm sure you know, because of and you don't need to go off on commenting broadly what's happening in America, but there's extreme concern among many people that the critical race theory is being pushed in a way that you can't even, as these stories in my first 5 were making reference to, you can't even respond, you can't even question it. And so you end up with a kind of a totalitarian mindset coming out of universities and schools where the law is laid down, the assessment of America as a deeply racist country, which many people would not agree with, is treated as fact, and everything flowing from what the critical race theory advocates want is assumed to be what must be followed. And I will tell you, there was just cheering around the country to hear that there was a group of parents who banded together and just said, we're not going to let this tear apart our school, because I think everyone, I'd love to have you address, how does a school district like yours, how do you create unity? How do you make more unity? But that's really the critical race theory advocates try to say, you either go along with us or you are agreeing that you accept racism, and those are not the only two choices. You can be opposed to critical race theory and the social justice warrior mindset and still say, I demand, I want unity, I want clear communication, I want fairness. There's a better way, and that's, I think, what this parent group that got together really managed to convey to America. I'd love to have you address kind of what the goal was of this parent group that you were part of.
That's a really great point. So last end of August, early September, we did form together as a group, and we said we're going to fight this. And so we started to actually utilize the open records requests in our school district, and we sent a lot of requests for different documents that were referenced in the CCAP. We analyzed them. We used them as the basis for our public comments during board meetings. We sent in emails to the administration and to the board expressing our concern over what we were seeing. And we also just really banded together to inform and enlighten our community at large. The parents of the students were the ones who were really concerned, but there was a larger community that doesn't necessarily have kids left in the district, but they don't want to see our schools go this direction. And so we had to do some broader community engagement and education. And so a lot of these things, were going on all last fall and all last winter. And then in anticipation of the school board election, we had two candidates, myself and Cam Bryan, who was in place 4, step forward and say, we'll run for the school board, because we realized that we had really been asleep. This community had just not been paying attention. And the last 3 members of our school board got on the school board in unopposed races, and they didn't even have to run a campaign against anybody. And so we really realized that if you care about what happens in your school district, you have to be awake and you have to know what's going on and you have to elect the right people to your school board. And so that's what we did.
Hannah Smith, I have to tell you, I am so impressed. First of all, thank you for running and for being brave, because these are the kinds of issues, many times, if you attempt to speak up at all, the slogan slinging done by the people who support critical race theory, who would have the social justice mentality invade every aspect of schooling, education, clubs, everything. They are quick to criticize, quick to claim that somehow intolerance or racism must be behind what you're saying. So it takes bravery. It takes amazing bravery to say, I'm not going to just be silenced because of name calling that may occur. So I'm hoping moving forward that there is the ability and the willingness, I assume, at the school board to try to bring parents all together again and kind of say, look, we're one community. Talk about how you want, this is our last thing, because I know I said I'd let you go at a certain time, but you have plans, I assume, moving forward to try to build the cohesion and unity in your school district?
Well, those are the platforms that I ran on, was restoring trust with the community, increasing transparency between the district and the school board with the community, and really elevating the engagement of our board with this supervision of the district. And so we do have plans to try and bring everybody together. We are all dragons, and that's why people move to Southlake, because they love the unity of our school district. They really do, and that's why they move here. And so we have to get back to that. We're all dragons, and we're all in this together, and we really all care deeply about our kids. And so how can we move forward, and what is that path forward? And I think a lot of it just involves listening and being empathetic and making sure that our administration takes seriously those cases that are brought to it where kids are feeling unsafe, and making sure that we restore that trust. And that's what I'm willing to do, and that's why I'm on the school board.
Hannah Smith, I thank you again for running, for joining me today. Just great talking with you. Congratulations on your win, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.